Quiet down this instant.
Now, Jim! How dare you hurt my daughter?
The slap echoed through the courthouse hallway before I could reach her. My daughter Maya, 13 years old, nonverbal, mid-sensory meltdown, stumbled backward from Diane Kruger's open palm. The HOA president's hand was still raised, her face twisted with contempt. I said, "Shut that noise up," the board president hissed at my daughter, who was stimming, rocking, humming, trying desperately to regulate the fluorescent lights and echoing sounds, overwhelming her senses. What Diane didn't know was that she just committed felony assault on a disabled minor in a federal courthouse, in front of witnesses. And I'd spent 15 years as a civil rights attorney, waiting for someone to hand me a case this perfect. I'm David Morales. I take down people exactly like her for a living. The Fair Housing Act is my weapon. The Americans with Disabilities Act is my shield. And every word that came out of the property values crusader's mouth for the past 6 weeks had been building toward this exact moment of legal annihilation. If you've ever watched someone powerful destroy themselves with their own cruelty, you'll want to see how this ends. So hit the subscribe button now. My late wife, Carmen, died 13 years ago from complications during Maya's birth. Her last words to me were a question: "Will you protect her?" I said yes. I had no idea that promise would mean going to war with our own neighborhood. Carmen spent her final months designing a sensory garden in our backyard, wind chimes tuned to specific frequencies Maya found soothing, textured plants for tactile stimming, a small water feature with white noise to drown out the world's harshness. That garden was Carmen's final gift to our daughter, a safe space, a sanctuary. Diane Kruger wanted it destroyed, called the wind chimes noise violations, demanded I control my child's disruptive vocalizations, or face daily $1,000 fines. She didn't use the word autistic in her citations, too obviously discriminatory. Instead, she wrote excessive noise and failure to maintain peaceful environment and disturbance to community standards. But I read what she really meant. I'd seen this pattern 100 times in depositions and courtroom testimony, coded language, ableist discrimination dressed up as property protection, the kind of systemic prejudice that federal courts were designed to dismantle. For 6 weeks, I documented everything, every citation, every email, every board meeting where the woman in the tailored suit made it clear that families like mine, families with disabled children who couldn't perform neurotypical silence, didn't belong in Ridgemont Hills. Tell me, where are you watching from? Today was supposed to be the pre-trial hearing for the HOA's lawsuit against me. They wanted an injunction prohibiting Maya from using our backyard during quiet hours, which they defined as 7 a.m. to 9 p.m. Essentially, all her waking hours. They wanted to force my nonverbal autistic daughter to suppress the self-soothing behaviors that kept her from complete sensory collapse. I'd come prepared with expert witnesses, medical documentation, and a countersuit citing Fair Housing Act violations. Standard disability discrimination defense. I'd win, the HOA would back down, and we'd settle. Then Maya had a meltdown in the courthouse hallway. The fluorescent lights, too bright. The marble floors, sound bouncing everywhere. The crowd of people, too close, too loud, too much. She started humming, rocking, flapping her hands. Normal regulation behaviors for an autistic teenager in sensory overload. And Diane Kruger, HOA president of Ridgemont Hills, walked up to my 13-year-old daughter and slapped her across the face. "Control your brat," she'd said before the slap, "or I'll do it for you." Through the courtroom door window, I saw Judge Catherine Morrison's face. She'd witnessed everything. The contempt in her eyes wasn't directed at Maya's meltdown. It was directed at the board president, who just committed assault in her courthouse. The judge's voice cut through the hallway like a blade. "Bailiff, detain that woman immediately. All parties in my chambers. Now." Diane went pale. "Your Honor, I was just—" "Save it for the criminal proceedings," Judge Morrison said. "You just assaulted a disabled minor in federal court during a discrimination case, where you're the defendant." That's when the enforcer in crimson realized what she'd done. That's when her confident smirk finally cracked. And that's when I knew I wasn't just going to win this case. I was going to destroy her entire operation. Judge Morrison's chambers felt smaller than they should have, packed with tension and the smell of old law books. Maya sat beside me, still trembling, her hands flapping rhythmically, a self-soothing stim she'd use for hours after sensory overload. I kept one hand on her shoulder, grounding her, while my other hand held my phone recording every word spoken in this room. Diane Kruger sat across from us, her attorney whispering urgently in her ear. The board president's face had gone from pale to flushed, her carefully maintained composure fracturing with each passing second. Judge Morrison didn't sit. She stood behind her desk, arms crossed, looking at the property values crusader like she'd just tracked mud across a courtroom floor. Ms. Kruger, do you understand what you've done? The judge's voice was ice-cold precision. Your Honor, I apologize if my actions were misinterpreted. The child was making disturbing noises, and I simply attempted to. You struck a minor with a disability during a court proceeding about disability discrimination. Morrison cut her off. A minor who was experiencing documented sensory overload in my courthouse, where cameras recorded everything. Diane's attorney, a nervous man named Richard Paulson, cleared his throat. Your Honor, my client is willing to issue a formal apology. Your client is going to be arrested. Morrison picked up her phone, pressed a button. Bailiff, I need you in chambers with handcuffs. That's when the woman in the tailored suit finally broke. This is ridiculous. That girl has been disrupting our entire neighborhood for months. Do you know what it's like living next to constant screaming and noise? My property value has dropped because of them. There it was, the admission I needed, not coded language this time. Raw, unfiltered ableism recorded on my phone, spoken directly in front of a federal judge. Ms. Kruger, I said quietly, you just confessed to targeting my daughter because of her disability, in front of witnesses. That's a Fair Housing Act violation. Federal crime. Her face went white again. The bailiff arrived. Judge Morrison gestured toward Diane. Ms. Kruger is being held in contempt of court and charged with assault on a minor. Book her, set bail at $50,000, and ensure she has no contact with the Morales family pending trial. Your Honor, this is excessive, Paulson started. Your client struck a child in my courthouse during a disability rights case. She's lucky I'm not charging her with a hate crime. Morrison turned to me. Mr. Morales, I'm granting an emergency restraining order. Ms. Kruger is prohibited from any contact with you or your daughter. The HOA lawsuit is dismissed with prejudice, and I'm referring this case to the Department of Housing and Urban Development for Fair Housing Act investigation. My chest tightened with something between rage and vindication. HUD investigations meant federal oversight, pattern and practice reviews. If they found systematic discrimination, and I knew they would, Diane's little kingdom would crumble. As the bailiff cuffed the board president's wrists, she looked at me with pure hatred. You've destroyed my reputation over a spoiled brat who can't behave in public. Maya's hand found mine. She signed in ASL. Bad lady? I signed back. Bad lady going away. Judge Morrison witnessed the exchange, and something shifted in her expression. Mr. Morales, my daughter has cerebral palsy. I know what it's like fighting for accommodations in a world that sees disability as inconvenience. She looked at Diane being let out. Some people need to learn that the law protects vulnerable children more than it protects property values. After they took the enforcer in crimson away, I sat with Maya in the empty chambers. She was calming down, her stims becoming less frantic. I pulled up a video on my phone, ocean waves, her favorite calming sound, and she leaned against my shoulder. Your Honor, I said, I have reason to believe this isn't an isolated incident. Diane Kruger has been targeting other families with disabled children in Ridgemont Hills. Morrison nodded slowly. Then make sure HUD knows everything. Document it all. Because if there's a pattern, this becomes a civil rights case affecting your entire community. I thought about the sensory garden Carmen built, the wind chimes Diane had cited as violations, the sanctuary my wife created with her dying breaths that the clipboard queen had tried to destroy. This wasn't just about Maya anymore. This was about every family the tyrant in heels had crushed under the weight of her property value obsession. The HOA board meeting room felt different when I walked in 3 days after Diane's arrest. The same beige walls, the same corporate conference table, but the power dynamic had shifted. Word had spread fast through Ridgemont Hills. The board president arrested for assaulting a disabled child in federal court. People were talking, asking questions, and I'd called this emergency meeting to give them answers. Patricia Chen sat at the secretary's desk, her hands trembling as she organized papers. She was maybe 62, with kind eyes that kept darting to the door like she expected Diane to burst through at any moment. I'd met Patricia twice before, once at a community barbecue, once when she'd delivered HOA violation notices to my door, With an apologetic expression she thought I hadn't noticed. Now she looked at me, then quickly away. Her fingers tapped the table, anxious rhythm, guilty conscience. She knew something. I could read it in every nervous gesture. "Thank you all for coming," I started, addressing the dozen homeowners who'd shown up. More than I expected. "I'm here because what happened to my daughter isn't an isolated incident. Diane Kruger has been systematically targeting families with disabled children, elderly residents with medical equipment, anyone she deemed disruptive to property values." A woman in the back raised her hand. "My son has ADHD. We got cited 3 times last month for his basketball making too much noise in our own driveway." Diane said, "Problem children needed stricter supervision." Another voice, "My father has Parkinson's. His medical equipment hums at night. She tried to fine us $2,000 for noise pollution." Patricia's hands had stopped moving. She stared at the stack of papers in front of her. Board meeting minutes, I realized. Documentation. Evidence. Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might speak. Then she looked at the door again, and whatever courage had surfaced disappeared. "Patricia," I said gently, "you've been secretary for how long?" 8 years. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You've documented every board meeting, every decision, every citation Diane issued." I kept my tone neutral, non-threatening. "You know what's in those records?" She nodded, still not meeting my eyes. Her wedding ring caught the fluorescent light as she twisted it around her finger, over and over, nervous energy seeking outlet. "I can't." She started, then stopped, swallowed hard. "My son. He struggled with addiction years ago. Diane knows. She said if I ever spoke against her, she'd make sure my grandchildren found out. Make sure everyone in this community knew." The room went silent. This was the leverage the property values crusader used. Not just citations and fines, but personal destruction, finding people's vulnerabilities and weaponizing them. "Patricia," another homeowner said, an elderly man named Frank, "My grandson is an addict too. Been clean 3 years. If your son struggled, that makes you human, not shameful." Patricia's eyes filled with tears. "But the kids, they don't know. And if Diane..." She stopped, realizing what she'd just revealed. That even behind bars, even facing criminal charges, the woman in the tailored suit still controlled her through fear. I pulled out my laptop, opened the Fair Housing Act documentation I'd been compiling. "Patricia, Diane is in federal custody. She can't hurt you anymore, but she's hurt dozens of families. And those board meeting minutes you're holding, they're legal documents. They can prove pattern and practice discrimination." Her hands moved to protect the papers, clutching them against her chest. "You don't understand what she's capable of." "I understand she slapped my 13-year-old daughter because Maya's autism offended her sense of order." My voice stayed calm, but the rage underneath was molten. "I understand she's been running this HOA like a dictatorship for years. And I understand you're the only person who documented everything she's done." Patricia looked at the other homeowners. The mother whose ADHD son got targeted. The daughter whose father's Parkinson's equipment was cited. Frank with his recovering addict grandson. People who'd been silent because silence felt safer than confrontation. "If I give you these minutes," she said slowly, "Diane will destroy me." "Diane's already destroying herself," I said. "Federal charges, Chute investigation. Judge Morrison referred the case to DOJ's Civil Rights Division. The question isn't whether the enforcer in Crimson falls. The question is whether we let her take more families down with her or whether we stand together and make sure she can't hurt anyone else." Patricia's fingers loosened on the papers. Just slightly. Not surrender yet, but the first crack in the wall of fear the clipboard queen had built around her. "I need time," she whispered. "Please, just give me time to think." 2 days after the emergency meeting, I found an envelope slipped under my front door. No return address, just my name written in Patricia's careful handwriting. Inside was a single sticky note. "Sensory Garden, 7 a.m. Come alone." I stood in Carmen's garden as dawn broke over Ridgemont Hills, watching the wind chimes catch the first light. The textured plants she'd chosen for Maya, lamb's ear, silvery sage, ornamental grasses, swayed in the morning breeze. The small water feature burbled its white noise, drowning out the world's harshness. This was Maya's sanctuary, the place where she could exist without judgment, without demands to be someone she wasn't. Patricia appeared at my back gate, clutching a laptop bag against her chest like armor. Her eyes were red-rimmed, sleepless. She glanced back at her house, checking, always checking, then slipped into the garden. Diane made bail yesterday, she said without preamble. $50,000? Her husband paid it. She called me within an hour. My stomach dropped. What did she say? That I was making a mistake, even considering talking to you. That she has insurance, documentation on everyone who's ever crossed her, proof of Frank's tax issues from 2019, evidence that the family with the ADHD kid falsified their home improvement permit. My son's arrest records from 10 years ago. Patricia's voice cracked. She's been collecting ammunition for years, building files on anyone who might challenge her. That's blackmail, another federal crime. She doesn't care. Patricia opened her laptop with shaking hands. She told me if I give you those board minutes, she'll destroy everyone who spoke at that meeting, every family, every secret. She said property values would plummet when the neighborhood discovers we're full of liars and criminals and defective families. The last phrase made my blood ice over. Defective families. The mask was off completely now. Diane Kruger wasn't just protecting property values. She was conducting social eugenics through HOA enforcement. Show me what you have, I said. Patricia pulled up a folder labeled Board Minutes 2020-2025. 5 years of documentation. She clicked on a file from 18 months ago, and I read the screen over her shoulder. Discussed the increasing number of special needs children in Ridgemont Hills. Board President Kruger expressed concern that visible disabilities negatively impact property values and neighborhood reputation. Proposed implementing stricter noise ordinances to discourage these families from remaining in community. My hands clenched. This was it. Explicit discriminatory intent, documented in official HOA records. Patricia scrolled through more files. March 2023. Board President suggested increasing fines for families with behavioral issues to encourage relocation. July 2023. Discussed targeting homes with medical equipment noise, wheelchairs, ventilators, mobility devices. January 2024. Kruger stated, normal families deserve to live without constant reminders of disability. How many families has she targeted? I asked. At least 15 that I've documented. 4 with autistic children, 3 with elderly parents requiring medical care, 2 with physical disabilities. The rest, ADHD, anxiety disorders, developmental delays. Patricia's voice was hollow. She kept a spreadsheet, David. An actual spreadsheet tracking which families had disabled members, rating them by severity of disruption. Your family was marked high priority removal. The tyrant in heels had been running a systematic campaign to ethnically cleanse Ridgemont Hills of families with disabilities, and she documented every step. The HUD investigation, I said slowly, will crucify her for this. This isn't just Fair Housing Act violations. This is conspiracy, intentional discrimination. Federal prosecutors love cases this clean. She knows. That's why she's threatening everyone now. She's trying to make sure no one cooperates with investigators. Patricia closed the laptop. But I can't live with this anymore. Watching what she did to your daughter, hearing Maya cry in that courthouse. I used to be a special education teacher, David. I spent 30 years protecting kids like Maya, and I've spent the last 5 years helping Diane Kruger drive them out of their homes. You were afraid. I was a coward. She handed me the laptop. Here, everything. Board minutes, emails, the targeting spreadsheet, voice recordings from meetings where she made explicit discriminatory statements. It's all here. I took the laptop like it was a sacred text, because in the world of civil rights law, this was scripture. This was the smoking gun that federal prosecutors built entire cases around. Patricia, the board president will come after you for this. Let her try. Something had shifted in Patricia's expression, guilt transforming into determination. My son's been clean for 8 years. He volunteers at a recovery center now. Patricia's revelation about Diane's documentation changed everything. But I needed more than board minutes and spreadsheets. I needed to understand the legal foundation, or lack thereof, that the HOA stood on. So I did what every civil rights attorney does when building a federal case. I went digging through public records. The Maricopa County Clerk's office smelled like old paper and bureaucracy. I'd been here dozens of times for other cases, knew which clerk to approach for fast service. Sandra, a woman in her 50s who'd processed more HOA documents than anyone in Arizona, looked up when I approached her window. David Morales, let me guess, another HOA nightmare? The worst one yet. I slid my request form across the counter. I need the complete incorporation documents for Ridgemont Hills HOA, articles of incorporation, CC&Rs, all amendments, and any ADA compliance certifications filed with the county. Sandra's eyebrows rose. ADA compliance certifications for an HOA? Required under Fair Housing Act for any homeowner association incorporated after 1995. They need to file proof they've implemented disability accommodation procedures. I'd prosecuted 3 cases where HOAs failed this requirement. The consequences were devastating for the HOAs. She disappeared into the records room. 20 minutes later, she returned with a thin folder. Too thin. This is everything we have on file for Ridgemont Hills, Sandra said, sliding it across. Incorporated in 2010. Articles of incorporation, original CC&Rs, 1 amendment from 2015 about landscaping standards. I flipped through the documents, my pulse quickening. Where's the ADA compliance certification? There isn't one. What about fair housing accommodation procedures? Reasonable modification request forms? Any documentation showing they've implemented federally required disability protections? Sandra shook her head. If it's not in that folder, they never filed it. My hands went still on the papers. This was bigger than I'd expected. Sandra, let me be very clear. An HOA incorporated in 2010, 15 years after the Fair Housing Act amendments, operating without ADA compliance documentation is operating illegally. Every citation they've issued, every fine they've collected, every enforcement action they've taken could be considered void. Well, Sandra said slowly, then Ridgemont Hills has been operating illegally for 15 years. I pulled out my phone, photographed every page. The articles of incorporation listed Diane Kruger as founding president. The CC&Rs contained language that was facially discriminatory, maintaining peaceful environment free from disruptive behaviors, with 0 provisions for disability accommodations. The 2015 amendment actually made it worse, adding noise control standards that failed to exempt medical necessity or disability-related behaviors. Sandra, I need certified copies of all this, and I need your affidavit confirming no ADA compliance documents exist in county records. You're building a federal case. I'm building the federal case. I thought about Patricia's laptop, the targeting spreadsheet, the explicit discriminatory statements. Combined with this, proof the HOA had never even attempted legal compliance, I had enough to dismantle the entire organization. The woman who runs this HOA slapped my autistic daughter in federal court. Then I discovered she's been systematically targeting disabled families for years. And now I'm learning she's been doing it through an illegally operated organization that never bothered filing required federal documentation. Sandra started processing the certified copies. Your daughter okay? She will be, once I make sure Diane Kruger can never hurt another family. The copies took 30 minutes. I left the clerk's office with a folder that weighed maybe 2 pounds, but would hit the property values crusader like a wrecking ball. Every citation she'd ever issued, potentially unenforceable. Every fine she'd collected, potentially illegal. Every family she'd driven out, potentially entitled to damages. I sat in my car in the parking lot, calling the HUD investigator assigned to our case. Rebecca Torres answered on the second ring. Mr. Morales, I was about to call you. We've received the complaint and Judge Morrison's referral. I'm opening a full investigation into Ridgemont Hills HOA. Rebecca, it's worse than we thought. The HOA never filed ADA compliance documentation. They've been operating without federally required disability protection since incorporation. Silence. Then, you're certain? I have certified copies from county records and a clerk's affidavit. The board president has been enforcing rules through an organization that lacks legal standing to enforce anything. David, that's a systemic failure. If they've been operating illegally for 15 years, every action they've taken is potentially voidable. Every family they've fined, every lien they've filed, all potentially illegal. I looked at the documents spread across my passenger seat. The enforcer in crimson built her empire on sand, and she never realized it. I'm escalating this to DOJ Civil Rights Division immediately. This isn't just discrimination. This is an entirely illegitimate organization pretending to have authority it never possessed. Torres paused. How many families has she targeted? At least 15 documented cases, probably more. Then we're looking at class action territory, pattern and practice, systemic discrimination through an illegal enforcement structure. Her voice hardened. Mr. Morales, I need everything you have, board minutes, targeting documents, and these county records, because we're about to take apart Ridgemont Hills HOA piece by piece. I drove home with the windows down, letting the Arizona heat wash over me. Maya was in school, her special education program that had taken years to fight for. Years of IEP meetings and advocacy and explaining to administrators that her disability wasn't a behavior problem to fix. The same fight. Everywhere we went, the same battle for her right to exist as she was. But this time, the woman in the tailored suit had made a fatal mistake. She'd built her discrimination machine without checking if the foundation was legal, and now the whole structure was about to collapse. The threatening email arrived at 11:47 p.m., 3 days after I'd delivered the county records to HUD. No subtlety this time, no coded language, just raw desperation from a woman watching her world crumble. You've made a terrible mistake, David. I know about your medical malpractice case from 2019, the one you settled quietly to protect your reputation. I know your daughter's IEP records list behaviors the school considers violent outbursts. I know you were investigated by CPS last year after a neighbor reported neglect. None of it stuck, but imagine what a jury would think if they knew. Drop this case, or I make sure everyone knows the Morales family isn't the victim you're pretending to be. My hands shook as I read it, not from fear, from rage so pure it felt like burning. Every single accusation was a distortion. The malpractice case was a nuisance lawsuit from a client who'd lost on the merits and tried again with frivolous claims against everyone involved, including me as co-counsel. It was dismissed, not settled. Maya's IEP did document meltdowns, sensory overload responses that special education teachers recognized as disability-related, not violence. The CPS investigation came from an anonymous report that I left my daughter unattended. They'd visited once, seen Maya safe with her trained caregiver, and closed the case within 48 hours. Diane Kruger had taken normal life events and weaponized them. This was her playbook: find fragments of truth, twist them into ammunition, threaten exposure. I forwarded the email to Rebecca Torres and Detective Sarah Chen, who was handling the criminal assault case. Then I walked upstairs to check on Maya. She was asleep in her bedroom, surrounded by the weighted blankets and sensory tools that helped her feel safe. Her face was peaceful in the dim glow of her star projector. Carmen had bought it during her last week alive, knowing Maya would need soothing lights after she was gone. I'd promised Carmen I'd protect our daughter. That promise had become my entire life's work. Diane's threats weren't going to stop me. They were going to bury her deeper. My phone buzzed. Rebecca Torres. David, this email is witness intimidation, federal crime. I'm contacting the U.S. Attorney's Office tonight. Combined with the assault charge, the fair housing violations, and now this, she's looking at serious prison time. How serious? If DOJ prosecutes fully, 10 to 15 years. She's not just violated civil rights law, she's obstructed a federal investigation and threatened a witness. Rebecca's voice held satisfaction. The board president just guaranteed she'll never hold power over anyone again. I went downstairs, made coffee I didn't want, and sat in the sensory garden Carmen had built. The wind chimes sang in the night breeze, the same chimes the property values crusader had cited as violations. The water feature burbled its constant white noise. This space had been cited, fined, threatened with destruction, because it allowed my daughter to exist comfortably. My phone lit up again. Patricia Chen texting at midnight. Diane just called me, screaming. Said if I testified to HUD, she'd make sure my grandchildren learned about their father's criminal past. She's panicking, David, threatening everyone who talked to you. I called Patricia immediately. Record everything, every call, every text, every threat. She's building our case stronger with every word. I'm scared. I know, but she's the one who should be scared now. Federal investigators don't take kindly to witnesses being threatened. I watched the wind chimes turn in the darkness. Patricia, how many board members are still loyal to her? Just one, Richard Matthews. He's terrified of her too, but he voted with her on every discriminatory policy. He's complicit. Patricia paused. The other 3 want her gone. They're afraid of being dragged down with her. Tell them to hire separate legal counsel. Distance themselves publicly from Diane's actions. Cooperate fully with HUD. I was already thinking 3 moves ahead, the way I did in every civil rights case. The enforcer in Crimson is about to learn that intimidation only works when people are isolated. We're not isolated anymore. After we hung up, I pulled up the class action paperwork I'd been drafting. 15 families documented by Patricia. Probably 20 more who'd suffered in silence. Every family entitled to damages, emotional distress, illegal fines returned, punitive damages for intentional discrimination. The tyrant in heels had built her empire on fear. She'd collected hundreds of thousands in fines from vulnerable families. She'd driven people from their homes. And she'd done it all through an illegally operated organization that had no authority to enforce anything. I thought about Maya, asleep upstairs in her safe space. About Carmen, who died ensuring that space existed. About every family the clipboard queen had crushed under the weight of her property value obsession. This wasn't just about winning a case anymore. This was about making sure what happened to us could never happen to anyone else. Making sure HOAs across the country understood that disability discrimination came with devastating consequences. Making sure Diane Kruger's downfall became a warning to every petty tyrant who thought power meant the right to harm vulnerable people. I opened my laptop and started typing the expanded complaint. Not just for my family, for everyone she'd hurt, everyone she'd threatened, everyone who'd been too afraid to fight back. The woman in the tailored suit had declared war on the wrong father. Patricia Chen's house was modest, carefully maintained, with a garden that spoke of decades of patient cultivation. She met me at her home office door at 8 a.m., looking like she hadn't slept. The room was small, desk piled with papers, walls lined with photographs of grandchildren, a lifetime of teaching awards gathering dust on shelves. "I need to show you something," she said, pulling a cardboard box from beneath her desk. "I've been keeping these for 3 years, ever since I realized what Diane was really doing." Inside the box were voice recordings, dozens of them, labeled with dates and locations. "Board meetings," Patricia explained. "Arizona is a one-party consent state. I started recording after Diane made her first explicitly discriminatory statement, and I realized no one else was going to stop her." She plugged a small recorder into her laptop, pulled up a file from 2 years ago. Diane's voice filled the room, confident and cold. "We need to be strategic about this. We can't say no disabled people, that's illegal. But we can enforce noise ordinances so strictly that families with autistic children, ADHD kids, anyone who can't maintain constant silence, they'll leave on their own. We don't remove them. We make them remove themselves." Another board member's voice. "Isn't that still discrimination?" "It's property value protection. Courts give HOAs wide latitude on noise control." Diane's voice held satisfaction. "And if they fight back, we bury them in legal fees until they can't afford to stay. Most families with disabled children are already financially stretched from medical costs. They break fast." My hands clenched. This wasn't just discrimination. This was calculated, predatory targeting of vulnerable families. Patricia played another recording, March 2024, just 6 months ago. "The Morales family is my biggest concern," the property values crusader said. "The father is an attorney, so he won't fold as easily. But the daughter is severely autistic. If we cite them enough times, if we make their daily life unbearable enough, they'll realize they don't belong here. Normal families shouldn't have to tolerate that level of disruption." "What if he sues?" another voice asked. "Let him. I have documentation on everyone in this community. The Chen's son is a drug addict. Frank Werner cheated on his taxes. The Patel family has immigration issues. If anyone testifies against me, I'll destroy their lives." The board president paused. "And if Morales really pushes, we target the girl directly, make her feel so unwelcome, so unsafe in her own neighborhood, that he'll leave just to protect her." Patricia stopped the recording. Her hands were shaking. She meant it, David. Every word. She wasn't just enforcing rules. She was engineering psychological warfare against disabled children. "How many recordings do you have?" 47 board meetings, 3 years of evidence, explicit statements about targeting disabled families, strategies for forcing them out, threats against anyone who opposed her. Patricia's eyes filled. And I sat there, meeting after meeting, I documented it all, told myself I was being smart, building evidence for someday. But really, I was just a coward who let her hurt people because I was afraid. You're here now. That's what matters. My grandchildren came to visit last week, she said quietly. Emily is 7. She asked why the neighbor's girl, Maya, always makes funny sounds. I explained autism to her, explained that Maya's brain works differently, that the sounds help her feel safe. Patricia looked at me with raw guilt, and Emily said, "That makes sense, Grandma. Why would anyone be mean to her for that?" And I couldn't answer, because I had been mean, by staying silent, by enabling Diane. I thought about Maya's face after Diane slapped her, the confusion in her eyes, the betrayal, not understanding why an adult would hurt her for something she couldn't control. Patricia, these recordings are evidence of criminal conspiracy, intentional discrimination, witness intimidation. I met her eyes. But if you testify, if you bring these to federal court, Diane will come after you with everything she has. Let her. Something had hardened in Patricia's expression. My son knows about his past. My grandchildren will learn someday that their father struggled and fought and won. I'm not ashamed anymore. She pushed the box toward me. I'm ashamed that I waited this long, that it took watching a child get assaulted before I found my courage. I took the box like it was made of glass. 47 recordings. 3 years of the enforcer in crimson explaining, in her own words, exactly how she'd built her discrimination machine. The HUD investigator needs to hear these, I said, and so does the U.S. attorney. There's more. Patricia pulled up an email on her laptop. Diane sent this to all board members 2 days ago, after you filed the expanded complaint. Read it. The email was a threat disguised as strategy. If anyone cooperates with federal investigators, I have insurance files on all of you. The tyrant in heels doesn't fall alone. I photographed it with my phone. She just threatened federal witnesses, in writing. Patricia, she's not just burying herself. She's making sure the prosecution is airtight. Good. Patricia closed her laptop with finality. When do you need me to testify? HUD hearing is in 2 weeks. Criminal trial probably 3 months after that. I looked at the box of recordings. Are you ready for this? For everything she'll throw at you? Patricia thought of her grandchildren, of Emily asking why anyone would be mean to Maya, of 30 years teaching special education students, protecting them, advocating for them, and then 5 years of silence while the clipboard queen tortured families just like theirs. I'm ready, she said. Let's end her. The federal courthouse attorney conference room overlooked downtown Phoenix, glass and steel reflecting the desert sun. I'd spent hundreds of hours in rooms like this, building cases, strategizing with federal prosecutors, preparing witnesses for the legal warfare ahead, but this time felt different. This time, it was personal. Rebecca Torres from HUD sat across from me, along with Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen and DOJ Civil Rights Division Attorney Sarah Okonkwo. Between us lay Patricia's box of recordings, the county clerk's certified documents, and my expanding case file. Let me make sure I understand the full scope, Michael said, reviewing his notes. We have a 15-year illegally operated HOA, systematic discrimination against disabled families, documented targeting of vulnerable populations, witness intimidation, assault on a minor, and 47 recordings of the defendant explicitly planning discriminatory enforcement actions. That's the foundation, I confirmed, but we need to expand this beyond just Diane Kruger. She had enablers, board members who voted with her, an HOA attorney who should have flagged the missing ADA compliance documents, a management company that processed illegal fines. Sarah pulled up a spreadsheet on her laptop. I've been analyzing the financial records Patricia provided. In the past 3 years alone, Ridgemont Hills HOA collected over $400,000 in fines. 73% of those fines were issued to the 15 families with disabled members. Despite those families representing only 7% of the community, the numbers made the pattern undeniable. The property values crusader hadn't just been discriminatory. She'd been running an extortion operation specifically targeting disabled families. We're recommending RICO charges, Michael said. Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. Diane Kruger used the HOA as an ongoing criminal enterprise to systematically extract money from protected classes through intimidation and illegal enforcement. RICO charges, the legal equivalent of a nuclear option, usually reserved for organized crime, but applicable when someone runs a corrupt organization for financial gain through pattern criminal activity. What's the timeline? I asked. Grand jury indictment within 3 weeks. We'll need Patricia Chen's testimony, your documentation, and victim impact statements from affected families. Sarah looked at me. David, we're also building the civil case alongside criminal prosecution. Class action on behalf of all targeted families. We're looking at millions in damages, compensatory, punitive, and attorney's fees. The HOA's insurance won't cover intentional discrimination, Rebecca added, which means Diane Kruger will be personally liable. Her assets, her property, everything she tried so hard to protect, gone. I thought about the enforcer in Crimson's obsession with property values, her fear that Maya's visible disability would prevent her from selling her house at premium price. The irony was brutal. Her discrimination would cost her everything she'd tried to preserve. We need victim testimony, I said. Every family she targeted needs to tell their story. Make this real for a jury. Already working on it, Rebecca said. I've contacted 12 families so far. The mother whose ADHD son was cited for basketball noise wants to testify. The daughter whose father's Parkinson's equipment was called disruptive. Frank Werner, whose grandson's recovery Diane threatened to expose. Michael flipped through his notes. The assault charge alone carries up to 2 years. Add the fair housing violations, 5 years per count, and we're charging 15 counts, 1 for each documented family. Witness intimidation, 5 years. RICO, 20 years. We stack these charges. She's looking at 40+ years if convicted on everything. She's 48 years old, Sarah said quietly. That's effectively a life sentence. The room went silent. This was the weight of what we were building. Not just justice for Maya, but the complete destruction of a woman's life. Even knowing everything Diane had done, the magnitude of it settled heavy. She assaulted my daughter, I said, breaking the silence. She terrorized 15 families. She built a criminal enterprise designed to drive disabled people from their homes. She threatened witnesses to a federal investigation. Every choice she made, every family she hurt, those were her decisions. Agreed, Michael said, and our job is to make sure those decisions have consequences. We spent the next 3 hours mapping strategy. Patricia would testify about the recordings, the targeting spreadsheet, Diane's explicit statements. I would provide expert testimony on Fair Housing Act requirements and HOA legal obligations. The affected families would share their stories, years of harassment, financial devastation, children traumatized by systematic exclusion. One more thing, I said as the meeting wrapped up. Diane mentioned having insurance files on community members, blackmail material she collected. We need to find those files. Already on it, Rebecca said. Search warrant for her home and HOA office was executed this morning. We seized 4 filing cabinets and 3 laptops. Forensic analysis is underway. I imagined federal agents walking into the woman in the tailored suit's carefully controlled domain, dismantling her empire file by file. The power she'd wielded through fear and intimidation, stripped away by investigators with badges and warrants. When do we go to trial? I asked. Criminal case first, probably 6 months. Civil class action will follow. Michael stood, extended his hand. David, you handed us the cleanest discrimination case I've seen in 15 years. The board president documented her own crimes, threatened federal witnesses, and assaulted a disabled child in front of a judge. She built our case for us. As I drove home through Phoenix traffic, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. I almost deleted it, assumed it was another threat from Diane, but something made me open it. Mr. Morales, this is Linda Patel. You don't know me, but my daughter Priya is autistic like Maya. We moved out of Ridgemont Hills 2 years ago because Diane Kruger made our lives unbearable. When I heard you were fighting back, I cried. Please let me testify. Please let me tell what she did to us. Then another text, and another. Families I'd never met, reaching out from the shadows where the clipboard queen had driven them, each one carrying scars, each one ready to speak. By the time I pulled into my driveway, I had 17 messages from families the tyrant in heels had destroyed. Her empire wasn't just crumbling, it was erupting from within, all the buried pain finally finding voice. The Ridgemont Hills Community Center had never been this full. Every chair occupied, people standing against walls, more crowded in the doorway. I'd organized this gathering for one purpose, to let the families Diane Kruger had terrorized finally meet each other, share their stories, and understand they weren't alone. 23 families showed up, 23 stories of systematic cruelty. Linda Patel stood first, holding her daughter Priya's hand. We moved to Ridgemont Hills in 2021. Priya was 9, newly diagnosed with autism. Within 3 months, Diane cited us for excessive vocal disruptions. Priya hummed when she was happy. The board president called it noise pollution. A man in his 60s raised his hand. Robert Martinez, my wife has MS. Her wheelchair made sounds on our patio. Wheels, the motor, normal mobility device noise. Diane fined us $8,000 over 6 months. Said medical equipment should be kept indoors where it doesn't disturb neighbors. Story after story. A family with a son who had Down syndrome cited for lawn maintenance delays when the son's gardening took longer than neurotypical speed. A grandmother raising an autistic grandson threatened with foreclosure over disruptive behaviors that were sensory meltdowns. A veteran with PTSD whose service dog barked during nightmares. Diane tried to have the dog removed as a nuisance animal. I documented everything on my laptop, taking notes for the federal case. But more importantly, I watched these families connect, realizing the isolation they'd felt, the shame, the belief that maybe they really were the problem, was manufactured. The property values crusader had kept them separated, made each family think they were uniquely deficient. She told me normal families didn't have these problems, Linda Patel said, wiping tears. Made me feel like Priya was a burden to the entire neighborhood. We left because I couldn't watch my daughter be treated like a problem that needed solving. Patricia Chen stood from her seat near the back. All eyes turned to her, the HOA secretary who'd enabled it all for years. I owe every person in this room an apology, she said, voice shaking but clear. I documented Diane's discrimination for 3 years. I knew what she was doing, and I stayed silent because I was afraid of what she'd do to me if I spoke up. She looked at Linda Patel. Your family left while I sat in board meetings and said nothing. That's on me, and I'm going to spend whatever time I have left making it right. Frank Werner, the elderly man whose grandson's recovery Diane had threatened to expose, stood next. Patricia, you're here now. That matters. And you brought the evidence that's going to take her down. I pulled up a document on the projector screen, the federal indictment draft. This is what the U.S. attorney is filing against Diane Kruger. 15 counts of Fair Housing Act violations, 5 counts of witness intimidation, RICO conspiracy charges, assault on a minor. If convicted on all counts, she's facing 40 years in federal prison. The room went silent. Then someone started clapping. Within seconds, the entire community center erupted in applause. But here's what matters more, I continued, pulling up the civil class action complaint. We're also filing a lawsuit on behalf of every family she targeted. Compensatory damages for emotional distress, return of all illegal fines, punitive damages for intentional discrimination. We're asking for $5 million, a woman gasped. $5 million? Diane Kruger built a criminal enterprise that extracted money from vulnerable families and caused documented psychological harm to disabled children. The law allows for punitive damages to deter future discrimination. I looked around the room. Every family here is entitled to compensation. But more than that, we're going to make sure what happened to you can never happen to anyone else. Rebecca Torres stood from her seat. I'm the HUD investigator on this case. Based on what we've found, we're also issuing a consent decree that will fundamentally reshape how Ridgemont Hills operates. Mandatory ADA training for all board members, external oversight of enforcement actions, a disability accommodation coordinator position, and most importantly, a complete rewrite of the CC&Rs to remove all discriminatory language. What about the board? Someone asked. Are they all going down with Diane? That depends on cooperation, Rebecca said. Board members who enabled the discrimination will face consequences. Those who were intimidated or misled have a chance to make things right by testifying. Patricia raised her hand. I'm testifying. Everything. The recordings, the spreadsheets, the targeting strategies, all of it. One by one, other witnesses stepped forward. The HOA landscaper who'd been told to neglect yards belonging to problem families. The management company employee who'd been ordered to fast-track citations against disabled residents. A former board member who'd resigned rather than participate in the enforcer and Crimson schemes. By the end of the meeting, I had 37 witnesses willing to testify. The woman in the tailored suit's carefully constructed empire was being dismantled by the very people she'd tried to silence. As families filed out, exchanging phone numbers and support, Maya appeared at my side. She'd been at her after-school program, but my neighbor had brought her here for the last 20 minutes. She watched the adults hugging, crying, and signing to me. Happy people? I signed back, yes, happy because we're fighting the bad lady together. She considered this, then signed, I helped? My throat tightened. You helped more than anyone. You were brave when she was mean, and now everyone sees what she did was wrong. Maya smiled, a rare, genuine smile that lit up her whole face. Then she walked to the sensory garden visible through the community center windows, sat among Carmen's wind chimes, and stimmed freely while other families watched with understanding instead of judgment. The clipboard queen had tried to make my daughter invisible, had tried to erase her right to exist in public spaces. Instead, Maya had become the catalyst for liberation of dozens of families who'd been hiding in shame. The tyrant's greatest fear, that disability would become visible, had become her downfall. The federal courthouse steps felt different this time. 2 months had passed since the community center gathering, 2 months of depositions and witness prep and legal maneuvering. Now we stood at the threshold of the criminal trial, United States versus Diane Kruger. I arrived early with Maya, who wore her favorite weighted vest under a soft blue dress. She was nervous. Courtrooms meant sensory overload, meant the place where the bad lady had hurt her, but she wanted to be here, insisted on it, signing I brave over and over until I understood this was her choice. Patricia Chen met us on the steps, flanked by Linda Patel and 12 other families from Ridgemont Hills. They'd all come to watch the opening arguments, to see the woman who'd terrorized them finally face consequences. How are you feeling? Patricia asked me. Like we're about to watch 15 years of cruelty get exposed in open court. I glanced at the media vans setting up. This case had drawn attention. Local news, disability rights organizations, HOA reform advocates. The story of an HOA president who'd assaulted a disabled child and run a criminal enterprise targeting vulnerable families was too explosive to ignore. Assistant U.S. Attorney Michael Chen emerged from the courthouse, spotted our group, and walked over. David, the judge wants to see you in chambers before we start. Diane's attorney is requesting a last-minute plea deal. My pulse quickened. What kind of deal? Guilty plea on the assault charge and 2 fair housing counts. Drop the RICO charges and witness intimidation. Recommended sentence of 5 years, eligible for parole in 3. 5 years. For terrorizing dozens of families. For building a systematic discrimination machine. For slapping my daughter because her autism offended her sense of order. No, I said immediately. She goes to trial on all charges. I told them you'd say that. Michael smiled grimly. But the judge wants to hear it from you directly. Let's go. Judge Catherine Morrison's chambers felt familiar now. Same law books, same view of downtown Phoenix. Diane Kruger sat across the room with her attorney, Richard Paulson. She looked smaller than I remembered, her usual tailored confidence replaced with something brittle and desperate. Mr. Morales, Judge Morrison said, I want to make sure you understand the risk. A trial means uncertainty. The plea deal guarantees conviction and prison time. If the jury is sympathetic to Ms. Kruger, they won't be. I met Diane's eyes for the first time since the assault. Not when they hear Patricia Chen's recordings, not when they see the targeting spreadsheet, not when 23 families testify about systematic cruelty. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, this woman built a criminal enterprise. She documented every discriminatory action, threatened federal witnesses, and assaulted a disabled child in your courthouse. The evidence is overwhelming. I want a jury to hear all of it. Diane finally spoke, her voice hollow. I was protecting property values, that's all. Just protecting what people had invested in. You were protecting your own bigotry. I cut her off. You couldn't tolerate seeing disabled people exist in public, so you used HOA authority to drive them out. You called it property protection. Federal prosecutors call it civil rights violations. My career is destroyed, she said. My reputation, my marriage. My husband filed for divorce last month. I've lost everything already. Good, I said flatly, because the families you targeted lost their homes, their savings, their sense of safety. Disabled children lost their right to exist without harassment. You earned every consequence coming to you. Judge Morrison looked at Diane's attorney. Mr. Paulson, convey to your client that Mr. Morales has declined the plea offer. We proceed to trial as scheduled. 2 hours later, the courtroom was packed. I sat in the front row with Maya on my left, Patricia on my right. Behind us, the gallery filled with affected families, disability rights advocates, reporters taking notes. Diane entered through the side door, flanked by bailiffs. She'd worn red, her signature color, the power suit that used to intimidate. But in this context, surrounded by the people she'd hurt, it just looked tone-deaf. The jury filed in, 12 Phoenix residents who'd been vetted extensively. 3 had family members with disabilities. 2 had dealt with HOA disputes. All had sworn they could be impartial. Michael Chen stood for opening arguments. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about power and cruelty. For 15 years, Diane Kruger wielded authority over Ridgemont Hills Homeowners Association. She used that authority to target the most vulnerable families in her community, families with disabled children, elderly residents with medical equipment, veterans with PTSD. She didn't target them randomly. She targeted them systematically, deliberately, with documented intent to drive them from their homes. He pulled up the targeting spreadsheet on the courtroom monitors. 23 family names, columns labeled disability type, severity of disruption, priority for removal. The defendant kept this spreadsheet, Michael continued. She rated disabled families by how much their disabilities bothered her. She planned enforcement actions designed to make their lives unbearable. And when one father, Mr. David Morales, fought back, she escalated to violence. The monitors switched to courthouse security footage, the moment Diane slapped Maya. Frame by frame, you could see it. Maya, mid-meltdown, overwhelmed and vulnerable, and the property values crusader's hand, coming down with deliberate force. Gasps rippled through the gallery. 2 jurors' expressions hardened. That child, Michael said, is 13 years old, nonverbal autistic. She was experiencing sensory overload, a disability-related response to environmental stress. And the defendant's reaction to a disabled child in distress was violence. He paused, let the image hold. Over the next 2 weeks, you'll hear recordings of the defendant planning discriminatory actions. You'll hear from families she drove out of their homes. You'll hear from the HOA secretary who documented everything because she knew it was wrong. And you'll hear from disability rights experts who will explain exactly how the defendant violated federal law over and over and over. Michael looked directly at Diane. This isn't about property values. This is about a woman who believed disabled people didn't deserve to exist in her neighborhood, and who used HOA authority to make that belief a reality. The board president stared at her hands, not defiant anymore, just cornered. The trial had begun, and every word spoken was another nail in the coffin she'd built herself. Day 7 of the trial. The prosecution had methodically built their case. Patricia's recordings played in open court, the targeting spreadsheet analyzed by experts, 12 families testifying about years of harassment. Now it was my turn to take the stand. Michael Chen approached the witness box where I sat, hands folded, hyper-aware of Maya in the front row with her weighted vest and noise-canceling headphones. She was watching me, signing encouragement. Daddy strong. Mr. Morales, please tell the jury about the first HOA violation you received from Ms. Kruger. I described it all, the citation for Maya's vocal stimming, the $1,000 fine, the demand to control disruptive vocalizations that were, in reality, my daughter's disability-related regulation behaviors. The escalating fines that followed, wind chimes, garden decorations, every aspect of the sensory space Carmen had built for Maya. Did Ms. Kruger know your daughter was autistic? Michael asked. Yes. I disclosed it in my first response letter, citing Fair Housing Act protections for disability accommodations. I explained that Maya's vocal stimming was medically necessary, that the sensory garden was a reasonable accommodation under federal law. I looked directly at Diane. She responded by doubling the fines. Michael pulled up an email on the monitors. Is this the response you received? I read it aloud. Mr. Morales, disability does not exempt residents from community standards. Your daughter's behaviors constitute excessive noise regardless of medical explanation. The fines stand, and additional citations will be issued for continued violations. Normal families have a right to peaceful enjoyment of their property. The phrase, normal families, hung in the courtroom air like poison. What happened next? Michael prompted. She filed a lawsuit seeking an injunction to prohibit Maya from using our backyard during hours defined as 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., essentially all waking hours. The suit claimed my daughter's presence in our own yard created a hostile environment for neighbors. My voice stayed level, professional, but the rage underneath was molten. She was asking a federal court to confine a disabled child to her house because her disability was visible. And what happened during the pre-trial hearing for that lawsuit? This was it, the moment everyone in the courtroom had been waiting for. Maya had a sensory meltdown in the courthouse hallway. Fluorescent lights, echoing sounds, crowds, all sensory triggers. She was humming, rocking, flapping her hands, standard autistic regulation behaviors. I paused, making sure every juror was focused. Diane Kruger approached my daughter, told her to shut up, and when Maya continued stimming, because she literally couldn't stop, she was in neurological overload, the defendant slapped her across the face. "Where were you when this happened?" 10 feet away. I'd stepped aside to take a call from my office. I turned around and saw Diane's hand still raised, saw my daughter's face, saw the red mark forming on her cheek. My hands clenched. Judge Morrison witnessed it through the courtroom door window. That's why we're here. Michael played the security footage again. Slower this time. You could see everything. Maya's distress, her hands flapping frantically, Diane approaching with visible contempt, the slap that echoed through the marble hallway. 2 jurors were crying. "Mr. Morales, you're a civil rights attorney specializing in disability discrimination. In your professional opinion, were Ms. Kruger's actions targeting your family based on disability?" "Objection," Diane's attorney called. "Calls for expert opinion beyond." "I'll allow it," Judge Morrison said. "Mr. Morales is qualified as an expert in disability rights law. Answer the question." "Yes," I said clearly. Every action Diane Kruger took, from the initial citations to the lawsuit to the physical assault, was motivated by her belief that disabled people diminish property values and don't belong in normal communities. She said as much in her own words, recorded in board meetings. She documented her targeting in spreadsheets. This wasn't enforcement of legitimate rules. This was systematic discrimination disguised as HOA authority. Michael nodded. Let that sink in. No further questions. Diane's attorney, Richard Paulson, approached for cross-examination. He looked exhausted, defending the indefensible. "Mr. Morales, isn't it true that your daughter's vocalizations exceeded normal neighborhood noise levels?" "My daughter hums at conversation level volume, approximately 50 to 60 decibels, the same volume as a normal discussion or a refrigerator running." "But it was constant. So is a refrigerator. So are air conditioning units, traffic noise, dogs barking. The difference is my daughter's noise came from a disabled person, which made it intolerable to your client." Paulson shifted tactics. "You mentioned Carmen's sensory garden. Isn't it true those wind chimes violated HOA aesthetic guidelines?" "Those guidelines never mentioned wind chimes specifically, and even if they had, federal law requires HOAs to make reasonable accommodations for disability-related modifications. The sensory garden is a medical necessity for my daughter's well-being. A medical necessity to have decorative wind chimes? A medical necessity to have auditory input that helps regulate sensory processing challenges." I kept my voice even. "Those wind chimes were tuned to specific frequencies that calm Maya's nervous system. My late wife researched them for months before she died. They're not decoration. They're adaptive equipment." Paulson consulted his notes, clearly struggling. "Mr. Morales, you've painted my client as a monster. But isn't it possible she was simply trying to maintain property values for all residents? By driving disabled families out of their homes? By creating spreadsheets rating children by severity of disability? By assaulting a 13-year-old? I leaned forward. "There's a word for maintaining property values by excluding disabled people. It's called discrimination, and it's a federal crime." The courtroom erupted in applause before Judge Morrison's gavel could fall. "Order, another outburst and I'll clear the gallery." But the damage was done. The jury had seen everything, the evidence, the footage, the systematic cruelty. And they'd seen the enforcer in crimson sitting silently at the defense table, unable to deny any of it. When I stepped down from the witness stand, Maya signed to me. "You told truth. Bad lady sad." I signed back. "Bad lady going away forever." Diane watched us communicate, watched this display of the disability she'd tried so hard to erase. Her face was ashen. The property values crusader had built her empire on the belief that disabled people should be invisible. Now the whole world was watching her fall. The jury deliberated for 3 hours. When they filed back into the courtroom, Not one of them looked at Diane Kruger. That's when I knew. On the charge of assault on a minor, how do you find? Guilty. On count 1 of Fair Housing Act violations, how do you find? Guilty. 15 counts, 15 guilty verdicts, the witness intimidation charges, the RICO conspiracy, every single charge the federal prosecutors had brought against the board. President stuck. Diane's face remained frozen, but her hands shook as bailiffs moved to either side of her chair. Judge Morrison scheduled sentencing for 6 weeks out, then looked directly at the woman in the tailored suit. Ms. Kruger, you used authority meant to serve a community to instead terrorize its most vulnerable members. You targeted disabled families with systematic cruelty, documented your discrimination in your own words, and when challenged, you escalated to violence against a child. Morrison's voice was steel. You will remain in federal custody until sentencing. Bail is revoked. As they cuffed Diane's wrists, she finally broke. I was protecting property values, she said, voice cracking. That's all I was trying to do, protect what people invested in. You were protecting bigotry. Morrison cut her off. And now you'll spend the next portion of your life in federal prison contemplating the cost of that choice. They led the enforcer in crimson out through the side door. The courtroom erupted, not in applause this time, but in something deeper, relief, validation. The sound of people who'd been told they were the problem finally hearing that they were right all along. 6 weeks later, Judge Morrison sentenced Diane to 18 years in federal prison. The civil class action settled for $6.2 million, money that would be distributed among the 23 families she'd targeted, with the largest portion going to those who'd been driven from their homes. The consent decree Rebecca Torres had drafted became the blueprint for disability-friendly HOA reform across Arizona. Mandatory ADA training, external oversight, accommodation request procedures. Every HOA in the state now had to prove compliance with federal disability protections or face the same scrutiny Ridgemont Hills had endured. But for me, the real victory came on a Sunday afternoon 3 months after the verdict. I sat in Carmen's sensory garden watching Maya play. She was stimming freely, humming, flapping her hands, running her fingers across the textured plants her mother had chosen. The wind chimes sang in the breeze, those specific frequencies that calmed her nervous system. The water feature burbled its white noise, drowning out the world's harshness. Linda Patel and her daughter Priya had moved back to Ridgemont Hills. They lived 4 houses down now, and Priya was in the garden with Maya, both girls stimming together without judgment or shame. 2 autistic teenagers existing exactly as they were, in public, unbothered. Patricia Chen stopped by with coffee, settling into the garden chair beside me. The new HOA board approved funding for a community sensory park, she said, based on Carmen's design. They're calling it the Carmen Morales Memorial Garden. My throat tightened. She would have loved that. She'd be proud of you, of what you did. Patricia watched the girls play. 23 families got their homes back, their dignity back, their right to exist in their own neighborhood. That's Carmen's legacy, too. My phone buzzed with an email from a woman in Colorado. Her HOA was targeting her son's wheelchair ramp as an aesthetic violation. She'd heard about our case, wanted to know if I'd help. Then another email, a family in Texas. Their daughter's service dog was being cited as a nuisance. Another from Florida, an elderly man with dementia whose vocal outbursts were being treated as disturbances. The requests kept coming, families across the country realizing they didn't have to accept discrimination disguised as property protection, realizing federal law was on their side, realizing the clipboard queen's defeat had created a roadmap for fighting back. I looked at Maya, at Priya, at the sensory garden that had started this whole battle. Carmen had built this space knowing Maya would need sanctuary. She'd never imagined it would become the catalyst for liberating dozens of families, for reforming discriminatory HOA practices, for proving that disabled people's right to exist couldn't be legislated away by property value obsessions. Daddy, Maya signed. Safe home? I signed back. Yes, baby. Safe home. Forever. The tyrant in heels had tried to erase my daughter's right to exist in the world. Instead, Maya had become the face of a movement. The proof that disability wasn't disruption. It was just different ways of being human. And federal law protected those differences, no matter how many HOA presidents tried to enforce them away. Somewhere in a federal prison in Texas, Diane Kruger was learning what it meant to lose everything in service of bigotry. Her 18-year sentence was a message to every petty tyrant who thought authority meant the right to harm vulnerable people. Property values fluctuate, markets shift, houses gain and lose worth. But dignity, the right of disabled people to exist without harassment, without violence, without being rated on spreadsheets like problems to solve, that's not negotiable. That's what Carmen taught me, what Maya showed me, what 23 families proved when they stood together and refused to be silent anymore. If you've ever been told you don't belong, that your disability makes you less worthy of community, that your child's differences diminish property values, know this: federal law is on your side. Document everything, find your witnesses, and fight back. Because bullies only win when we let them, and we're done letting them win. If you want to hear more stories about standing up to discrimination and fighting for disability rights, share this in the comments and let me know where you're watching from. Your story matters, your fight matters, and together we're changing what communities look like, one sensory garden at a time.